Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. 0-day doesn't mean zero hope, fast detection and fast remediation. I'm Jacob Lukowitz, multimedia editor of SD Times. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand through the sdtimes.com website about 24 hours after the event. Secondly, if at any time you have questions about or during the presentation, you may submit them using the chat. In today's webinar, we'll get updated on zero-day vulnerabilities and see how you can use the JFrog platform to combat these potential threats in a live demo. Plus, we have some great resources that we'll be sharing with you throughout the webinar. Joining me today is William Manning, Solution Architect at JFrog. Great to have you here.
Hey guys, how you doing? I'm so happy to be here too. Thank you for having me. As stated, I am William Manning. I am one of the solution engineering managers, also a solution architect here at JFrog. And today we're going to be discussing a very serious subject that we hear a lot about these days, right? I mean, we all know the typical things. We see these, all these things that show up all the time in news feeds and Twitter and Hacker News and whatever, basically explaining the fact that, there's tons of vulnerabilities out there. The thing is when you create software, I always like to say this whenever I preface this by saying, my life started as a developer way long ago, 25 years ago, beginning of the dot-com boom and all that. Obviously, with the white on my face, I've been doing this for a long time. But I always like to say is that, and I consider myself in this category is, developers are artists, right? They're artisans in what they do. And the craft, and when they're doing it, they use a palette. And the palette they use and the materials, the medium that they use to express themselves when they're doing this is, of course, the code they produce, but also, too, the actual transitive dependencies, both implicit, direct dependencies and indirect transitive dependencies. And the thing is that you want to be able to go ahead and make sure that you're doing and building safe software for your company, for things like reputation and, of course, revenue. But at the same time, you don't want to hinder the software developer's ability to do what they do. But in today's world, the thing is that, when we look at stuff and you're managing your software supply chain, it always feels like the world is on fire. Right? It always feels like, there's something going on. There's a new vulnerability here and there. And how do you keep up? And how do you also do it in such a way that you can also preemptively stop this? We always hear the term shift left and that. But the thing is, you got to keep it behind the numbers, right? And just since 2021, 40% of the zero-day exploits of all time has been happening, and it's increasing. It seems unfathomable, but the thing is that over the past couple of years, we've heard more and more about these statistics. The fact that vulnerabilities, like just single ones can cost companies, almost, $4.5 million to go ahead and actually, remediate a lot of these. That's actually up from 2021. The thing is that software supply chain attacks also took longer to identify. That's one of the key factors that we're going to discuss here, is the fact that, the thing is that if you do have some sort of software supply chain attack, how do you quickly address it? Because the faster you fix it, the faster you can get back to, innovation. I always like to say you like to innovate more and remediate less. And the thing is, though, you need to still go in and protect yourself. Because the thing is, like in 2021, exploitations actually went from, increased to 42 days in 2020 from, to 12 days. Think about that. And when an exploit happens, the thing is that it's now become way faster when it hits the world. And understanding that, on average, it's called mean time remediation, MTTR. That's one of the values that's out there in the security world. Is that most of these exploits took almost 60 days. Think about that. Sometimes to do this, depending on the size of your organization. And this means that you're wasting time looking at the issues, right? You're trying to dig and investigate because it takes time. I mean, I always get, I'll give you an example of this in a little bit. But one of the things is whenever I discuss this with customers is the fact is, how do you know not only what's affected, when it was affected, but how long you've been affected and what else it's affected? I like to refer to this as blast radius, right? When you find something, what's the blast radius of it affecting your organization in terms of your software development? And knowing that 80% of the public exploits that are out there are actually are done before a CVE is even published. Think about this, right? I mean, you got to remember when a CVE is created, and just so you're aware, JFrog is a CNA. We are a CVE number authority. A lot of these exploits take time. You need to research them, find out the viability. Is this a real issue? What does it affect? Does it have other cognitive effect behind it? And then on top of that, Of course, you need things like peer review, right? Because you want to make sure, just like any other scientific method out there, you want to make sure that it's valid. So these things take time. And on average, most of the time when this happens, the thing is that, these exploits happen. And while a CVE is being created behind it, there's still things you could do. There's still information you can find out because there are things, info and warnings. I mean, just to give you an idea, like when Log4j happened, it became the whole world went on fire when it became a critical issue. But the thing is, actually, for weeks, there was actually information and warning coming out saying, hey, this is being investigated, just so you know. And knowing that in a lot of cases is actually one of the things, they always make the joke of, you come from me, a kid of the 80s and stuff, knowing is half the battle. And then, the thing is if you think about this, there were almost, in 2022, there were almost 21,000 registered CVEs across multiple languages. Don't get me wrong. But the thing is, 21,000 CVEs. And that number is always climbing. It's always growing. It's not going to stop. There's many reasons why these issues are the way they are. And you got to remember that one of the biggest key components behind this is the fact that 85 to 90% of the software you create is someone else's software, right? It's these open source components, these free and open source, FOSS, the whole thing of, free as in speech, not as in beer idea. And my favorite quote, whenever you think about this, and just keep this in your brain, because in my opinion, this really exemplifies the reason why we're here, is that every time you do a pip install, go get Maven fetch or something like that, it's the equivalent of finding a thumb drive on the street, walking in your production server and plugging it in. It really is. You don't know where it's coming from because in a standard typical development process, a coder is given a task. You have to solve a problem, right? And then they go, okay, great. I'm going to pick a language that best exemplifies what I do. In this case, I'm an NPM developer by trade. I started 2 companies using NPM, so I'm pretty seeded into it. But the thing is that, I go ahead, I design my project, I create a package.json for all my dependencies, right? Because I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. That's what we do as coders. We go, okay, great. I need something that's going to parse this. I need something that's going to scale an image, whatever you're doing, right? And then you're going to go ahead, do an NPM install for those resources. It's going to go to a third-party resource, bring it in, and you're in business. Problem is that software supply chain is terrible, right? If you're going to think about this overall, the thing is that once again, you have no idea where this is coming in. When we start talking about exploits, everybody talks about SolarWinds and Log4j and all that. And most of the problems that we see in a lot of these is it's not the direct dependencies that you're bringing in that actually cause the problem. The stuff that actually causes the problem is those third-party indirect transitive dependencies that come along with it. I always jokingly call NPM, by the way. I mean, we support over 32 package types, but I always joke around that NPM is kind of, I call it the house party, right? You invite 3 things into your package.json, 500 show up that you don't know, right? And how do you validate them? How do you go ahead and make sure that those are safe and secure and that you're not going to cause, potential threats to your organization? Like I said, in terms of financial, right? Because I think maybe it comes from things like lost reputation, right? Suddenly all your stuff is being leaked and your customers are fleeing a sinking ship because they're like, I don't trust these people anymore, right? You've lost a level of inherent trust because 99% of the code bases out there, at least 75% of them have at least one major open source vulnerable component. It may not seem like a lot, but it's usually much more than that, right? Think about that. Most of the stuff you use contains vulnerabilities. I'm not trying to scare you, just giving you the facts of the world. But on top of that, the thing is that 49% of those are high-risk vulnerabilities. And the thing is that also, too, a lot of these components, and I'm going to show you part of this today, is that those components are old, outdated, or just abandoned. I mean, we have stuff, and I'll show you in a bit, like, you bring in a transitive dependencies. Some of these dependencies are small, little ones, that come in, but they were like built back in 2011, 2012. I have one project that I put together, and we had binaries from 2006. I mean, it's crazy. It was some of the earliest libraries that were out there for some of these NPM kind of things, or Python, or JSON, or even worse with Java. Oh, don't even get me started on Java, right? There's a lot of these out there. And why does it happen? And understanding that is, understanding those supply chain attacks is very important. It's very low effort for people to get it, to actually do this. It really is. I mean, once you get into the community of NPM or other things like that, it's super low effort. You don't even need a lot of technical skill behind it. It's very easy to spread. You do an NPM install. If it's associated to a third-party transitive dependency, even 5 levels down, it's still going to come along for the ride, right? And the thing is that it's very easy to latch onto some of these commonly used components and things. And the problem is that it abuses that relationship between not only the developer and the source, but the customers that you have and your product. And the thing is that these attacks happen, they come in. And the thing is, it'll introduce backdoors, malicious code. I always like to talk about even the SolarWinds thing. I loved it. It was so elegant and cheesy at the same time. It was one of these things that it came in. It was associated like 4 levels down, so nobody even thought none the wiser on it. And the thing is that nothing really happened until suddenly, 14 days later, after this thing had launched, it kicked into action. Right? It had a 14-day timer. It's like, okay, great. Now I'm just going to open everything for you. Right? And the thing is that when we start thinking about these kind of things, we start looking at all the components around it. Because the thing is in 2021 there was a 650% increase in supply chain attacks alone, and then a 40% increase on top of that last year. So what we're doing at JFrog is we came up with our platform, right? And our platform covers end to end. We have Artifactory, the Universal Binary Repository Manager, which is our main point. It manages those third-party transitive dependencies, that 85 to 90% of the things you use to build your software. It also manages the builds you create and the software development lifecycle. We have a promotion API that allows you to promote your binaries through the cycle, so you can see dev, QA, staging, and production with all the ACLs are associated to it. It's a large metadata repository to see how your builds are coping and building and like testing results and all that. We have JFrog X-Ray, and our X-Ray product is really where we're going to focus today on how you combat this. And the difference between us and other security solutions in the market, just so you're aware, is that our Artifactory stores our binaries in a very unique approach. It's actually, the thing is that we store it as a checksum, right? So it's a SHA-256 checksum that represents the binary. The physical binary is stored as such and then represented in metadata. It also means that we don't do duplication, but the big thing is that we actually have a map of all the usage of any binary. So maybe you have 1,000 projects and 1,000 builds or whatever that you have in the world. They're all using one common core library. We store that library once and then we reference it 1,000 times. But since it is built in metadata that we actually do a majority of the work, our X-Ray product uses that same metadata. So it's a metadata to metadata comparison. So when we talk about 0 day, the way we combat this is through a multitude of tools that I'll show you today. But the main factor is that we're continuous security. You hear continuous integration, continuous distribution. We're continuous security because it's metadata to metadata. So behind the scenes, it's constantly evaluating. And what we're doing is we're evaluating that information against our database. And our database, because we are a CNA, is a combination of NIST and MVD sources. We have a relationship with another company that produces us with base level, CVEs. And then we have a massive research team that goes in and actually adds more metadata to it. And then you can build rules and policies and actions you take based on that information when you're evaluating those binaries. This carries all the way out to our distribution side. And we have another side called Connect for IoT devices. But one of the cool things about this is that we give you the ability to curate those binaries even before they come in and their constant level of evaluation. So this way your developers are always in the know of the stuff that they're using and they're always aware through things like our ID plugin, which I'll show you, our JFrog CLI, but also to the information that we have in Artifactory itself. This carries over to the creation side. The creation side through your CI process, whether it's an automated process, a manual process, whatever it is, when you create a build or you create a piece of entity software, you can publish that into Artifactory and even produce things like software bill of materials. You hear a lot of that these days. I'm not going to go into it. I've done plenty of webinars on software bill of materials. It's simply a list of the key ingredients that you have in your software so that when you send this over to, say, your customer, or you work with the government, initially is where it was, they had an idea of the pieces they were using. You're not giving them instructions on how to build your product or what your product does. All you're simply doing is telling them, this is the stuff I use to build what I built. And this actually carries all the way over to the consumption side. So what we provide is a level of security from shift left to shift right, right? These are the terms you hear all the time when you ever go to any security conference. And, shift left is super important. And this is where 0-day really matters most. I mean, just to let you know, if you're using a tool that's actually more towards the shift right side, it's 100 times more expensive for you to go fix it than it is to address it where it matters most, the frontline defense, your artisans, the developer. But also having it part of a continuous 3-year process also means that if something you were using today yesterday was fine and today it's not, with our continuous security, you can actually go ahead and stop the consumption of it from Artifactory to your developers or tools based on the things that you do. So you can actually put these walls in place to say, hey, you know what? A new 0-day came out on one of the libraries we're using. Stop all the builds and let's address it. But also, too, not having the proper information or not having that laser focused ability to find the exact issue, or if you actually have a bunch of CVEs for things you're not using, you're not implicitly stating that you're using a function, say in a third-party library that might have come in as an indirect transitive dependency. The thing is that how do you go ahead and go through these? Because in most cases, there's hundreds and hundreds of vulnerabilities, and we'll show you today how you can actually go through and delineate through them more rapidly and focus on where it matters most. So understanding that, what we've done is, we scan the software, right? We're scanning all the third-party transitive dependencies, all the binaries, all the applications, Docker containers, you name it, even infrastructure as code like Terraform. We're getting full visibility into it. I'm going to show you how you get every level of visibility inside so that you can see every key component and how it's associated, and also the blast radius if you do find something. You also have the ability to do more contextual analysis, is what we call it, which is a way to be laser focused in the things you're doing so you can address it more specifically so you can spend less time remediating and get back to the work at hand. I'm going to show you how you can control your security posture from beginning to end, right? How do you go in and address the issues? So this way you can put gates at the beginning so that you can stop it before it begins, or give your developers the tools and the knowledge for them to go ahead and address what they're trying to address. But also, too, being able to integrate this everywhere. We do call ourselves the Universal Binary Repository Manager or Platform. So the thing is that whether you're using our RCI tool, which is called pipelines, or you're using something like Jenkins or GitHub Actions, or even things like Azure DevOps or whatever, we have integrations in there. I mean, just to let you know, we have almost 8,000 customers that use us. We're like the biggest little company that you've never heard of. I always make that joke because the fact is that we've learned from our collective knowledge on how to address these more rapidly. And then lastly, it doesn't matter where you are. We've actually made sure that we've covered all the bases in this respect. And the idea is you can either be hybrid. We see a lot of cloud migrations these days. So we have our managed solution. It's a SaaS offering. I don't like to say SaaS per se. It is more of a managed. You pick your own cloud provider. You click your own region, whatever works for you, right? We're very flexible in the way you can use us. You can even use us to help migrate those over. I actually have whole webinars based on how do you migrate from your own data center to a cloud using our platform, and do it in such a way that doesn't provide a break in the stuff that you're doing. So saying that, we're also going to discuss some of the advanced features that we have, such as infrastructure as code, also secret detection, malicious code detection, application exposures, and services exposures. These are other things that affect you as a company. Now, I've already done enough talking. I've done over 18 minutes of slides. Slides are fine, but let's go ahead and let's do this. Let's go in and let's start looking around at the fun stuff, right? This is the stuff that really I like to show a majority of the time whenever we're doing this, right? So let's go ahead and let me show you the things that we have, right? So first, let's go in and let's go take a look. Oh, hold on. Sorry, I'm trying to get to my where is it? There it is. Sorry, I had to find my thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at our platform, right? Now, in Artifactory, one of the first places we want to do is we want to talk about repositories, okay? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a knowledge base on what we do, Okay, so first of all, when we look at repositories, this is how you store the binaries. I'm not going to go into, by the way, ACLs or things like that. Like I've actually, just so you know, I'm logged in with my Google OAuth, and I've got I've got fine granular access controls and whatnot. That's not what we're here for. What we're here to discuss is how do you actually manage all this stuff. So first of all, we have repositories in our product. Okay, so we have local, remote, and virtual is what we're going to concentrate on today. Local repositories of the binaries that matter to you. Remote repositories of those third-party transitive dependencies that you use for your third-party, for those third-party components, your npm install, your Docker pull, your pip install, whatever you're doing, they come through there. They're proxies. So if you have 1,000 developers and developer 0 brings down a library, it means 999 other developers will have the same binaries. Because some people ask me, what does really JFrog bring to the table for most companies? I always say it's actually consistency. Ensuring that if you're a global development organization or 2 people just working somewhere, it gives you the ability, it's actually the reason why the product was started, gives you the ability to make sure that your developers, your tools are all using the same resources. I'm sure we have people out there that do 12-factor and multi-tier methodologies, and the idea is, making sure that what you're developing, everything about it in your development environment should be the same thing as your production level environment, so you don't get that, works on my machine. Now, if you're going to have a bunch of local repositories, which represent the builds that you produce, the files you upload. You can also design your local repositories to match your software development lifecycle. So you can actually have dev and QA and staging and production. So you can promote your binaries through the cycle. So this way you make sure you have accountability there. But you're not going to have a whole bunch of URLs for, say, local, remote. So we have virtual. Virtual repositories is a single encapsulation for your developers to interact with, and everything else is behind the scenes. And to kind of show you one of the neat features of this is that our X-Ray product I mentioned works on the ideas of actually using metadata. And the way we implement something like that, just to kind of stay with the NPM idea, is that any repository you design, whether local or remote, at the very bottom here, the way you start off is you design your repositories, you sit down, you work with your team to say, here's our software development lifecycle, blah, blah, blah. But if you want our X-Ray product to properly do its job, then you're going to go ahead and say enable indexing in X-Ray. Now, when you enable indexing in X-Ray, it takes that list of metadata that represents the binary stored in this repository and goes ahead and actually puts it there for evaluation. So saying that, once you've actually gone ahead and you've done that, now let's go talk about how do you protect yourself, right? I'm not going to go into the details of things like, I'll just show you for a second. Say I design, since I'm talking about NPM, because NPM, by the way, is the most notorious. I think we have over 16,000 actual individual CVEs alone in our database for NPM. It's terrible. And I love NPM, but at the same time, it's terrible. So if you look here, I've got a repository called NPM where I'm going to do my work. And this is applicable across multiple and different languages. So don't worry about that. Everything I show you can be applied there. But if you look below, you can see I've got dev, I've got QA, and I've got production. And I have my remote repository. So this is my third-party transitive dependencies. This is where I'm going to produce a build. I'm going to send it here for QA, and I'm going to send it here for production, right? This allows me also, too, to query and say, hey, how many builds did I produce and how many actually made it into production? And if I want to use it, one of the nice things that we do in our product is we give you the ability to quickly and rapidly go ahead and actually, set this up, right? We have the set me up instructions for you to do whatever you want to do, and then go ahead and implement it. So I'm not even going to go into that. But once you've actually gone ahead and done this, let's go look at what you can do and how do you protect yourself, right? This is super essential. So let's go to X-Ray and let's go to our watches and policies. So once you've defined your repositories, and I have whole, by the way, webinars just based alone on how to implement and do your SDLC and all that. So we're just going to focus here. So what we have in our product is policies and watches. Policies are the rules and the actions you take, and watches is how you implement them. Let's go look at policies. So when we have policies, we give a policy a name. We give it a description, right? And that's a nice thing to have. It should be a precise name, by the way. We have a naming convention document that I wrote years ago that I think pretty much covers a lot of this. But if you take a look, we have 3 different flavors for you to choose from. It's kind of like if you're in the US, it's more of a Neapolitan. If you're more in the EU, it's more of a Coronado, right? So if you look here, and you can see where you have security, licensing, and operational risk. Operational risk we're going to get to, and that's one of my fun ones, right? That addresses the issue of the actual longevity of a binary and its remote source that supplies it. We'll go into that. But let's look at security first, right? And what you do is you create a series of rules, and these rules are going to help protect you. So let's go take a look at the rules, right? So I give a rule a name. It should be a descriptive name. I can have more than one rule based on policies and actions I take. And then I choose the criteria, which you consider more of an if statement. And then we have the actions, which are the then, if you were to think about it programmatically, okay? So first, let's talk about vulnerabilities, because we have vulnerabilities, malicious packages, and exposures. But let's look at vulnerabilities first. You can actually evaluate your stuff based on CVE, right? This is essential, right? So being able to say all severities, remember I mentioned that Log4j had info and warnings way before any of this came out? I always recommend as a pro tip, don't do any actions, just make sure you have something that shows that information, parse through it occasionally to see that you don't have something coming up that's going to cause everybody to freak out. You can also go ahead and use CVSS score, both V2 and V3. So you can go ahead and set your range. You also have the ability to go in and maybe it's specific CVEs. Think about that, right? Maybe there's a specific CVE that you read about in an article and you're like, you know what? I just want to make sure that no matter what, if this CVE comes into play, I want to perform some level of action. And then you have things like generate a violation only if a fixed version available. I have mixed feelings about this. We had some customers that asked for it. That's what we put in. The whole idea of like head in the sand like an ostrich, right? Don't tell me unless I can do something about it. And then we have our contextual analysis. One of the cool things I'm going to show you today is we'll let you know, is the CVE actually applicable? Think about this in the 0-day scenario. Instead of having to go through and search through everything, you can go ahead and say, show me exactly where it's happening so I can address it more rapidly. We cut down the amount of time it takes for you to go in and actually do a root cause analysis and also for your ability to actually take action on it. Now let's talk about actions, right? Actions are always fun. Now, actions are great because, first of all, it's going to generate a violation. That goes without saying, and I'll show you what that looks like inside of our product. You can do things like trigger a webhook, right? So this is just a simple JSON post. You can define your own webhook. It'll post it. You can take that data, parse it to your heart's content, do whatever you want. One of the parameters when you apply a rule through a thing called the watch, which I talked about earlier, is an email list, right? So you can either have an individual or you can even have a group email. This will allow you to go ahead and notify those people with the information on any sort of request you might have in terms of a violation that happens. We also have the ability for you to notify a deployer. Say a deployer comes up and they deploy something into Artifactory. We can notify them that they're bad people and they've done a bad job. We also have the ability here to go ahead and say notify by a separate email. This might be useful for things like critical issues, right? You might have a red team that goes ahead and addresses everything that's more critical. If you're using something like Jira, even with these 0 days, what's beautiful about it is you can connect to your Jira ticketing system and you can also create a Jira ticket. So if you take a look here, when it loads up, it just takes a second because it's Jira. Everybody's used Jira and knows this. But if you look here, here's a security violation. This is actually a high violation. I can go ahead and even make it actionable when I'm doing this, right? I mean, if you look here at what I'm doing, I can actually just show you that I can even link this back to the actual component itself, and I can actually see how it's being utilized. Then we get into the functions of 0 day, right? Whether it's preemptive or not. So let's talk about block downloads. This is where it comes into play the most. Say you're using a component for the past 5 years, Log4j. Suddenly it's the worst thing known to man. Well, this will stop the consumption of any binary that's historically stored in Artifactory from that moment forward. You can investigate it and go ahead and allow it so everybody can use it. But one of the main things here is this will automatically, a new 0 day happens, it will stop the consumption immediately, right? We're continuous scanning, we're continuous security on the back end. This alone is a lifesaver for organizations. We've gotten so much good feedback on this one. But what about the stuff that's out there that you want to use and you haven't used it yet, right? The new things. And remember I talked about coders or artisans, and you want to put guards in place, absolutely, for you to have, protect your organization. But you also want to start with the front line, even before a developer gets their hands on these libraries, both the indirect transitive dependencies and the direct implicits. And we have is block unscanned artifacts. This also means that we can actually stop the actual ingest. So in other words, say a developer does a pip install, blah, and blah is the worst thing. It goes out to the internet, it pulls in its Artifactory, it gets evaluated by X-Ray. If it meets your criteria, it's released to the developer tool. If not, they receive a message that they're bad people. No, I'm just kidding. They just get the message that they can't download it, right? For a reason, with a link, and they can go ahead and investigate it themselves. We even do this up to the point where we release software. And we even have things like around 0 day, around fail build, right? So one of the cool things is we can actually send an exit, a CI termination, a CLI termination, whatever. But we also have the idea of grace period. Why? Grace period is cool, in my opinion, for a couple of different reasons. Grace period gives your developers, it'll notify them, by the way, that you're going to kill the build. You're going to, this is going to happen in X number of days. So it gives teams time to go, hey, we got to fix this, but don't do a knee-jerk fix. Let's actually investigate it and make sure that we're addressing it properly. This also means, too, we also have things around, you can do all those same actions around things that are potentially malicious. So this, even if there's something inside of a package, you might be a jar file, and something inside that jar, you can stop malicious package intake. Same thing with 0 day. You can stop it based on information. This jar you might have grabbed off the internet, somebody goes ahead and says, it's the worst thing ever, go ahead and stop it. We do the same thing around exposures, right? So with exposures, these are things like, secrets, you might have that are being exposed, or services. Maybe you have a service in the backend in the Docker image that, is waiting for a TLS connection. I actually had an example of this. It started up, it connected to some remote server in China somewhere, and it requested all my log files. And this was just a Docker image I downloaded off the internet. Scary, actually. And same thing with application level exposures, and also too protecting yourself around even things like infrastructure as code, right? Like Terraform. But we also take one step further, things like licensing. Now this is some other things we do. We have our allowed license list, a banned license list. Unknown licenses are usually a pretty good indicator of malicious intent. Same with multiple licenses, right? And the actions, by the way, for all these others are the same. And the other piece you need to keep in mind, too, is operational risk. What is operational risk? Well, I'll show you. So on our wiki page, we have component operational risk. These are the things that you use and utilize. So if you take a look, what we're doing is we're evaluating on things like end of life. Is this binary end of life? What's the version age of this binary? How many versions of newer versions are available? And what's the health of the open source project? Remember I said, there's a huge chunk of things out there, these things you use that they've been abandoned. They haven't been updated a decade or more, right? It's insane if you think about it. But once you've actually gone in and defined a series of rules and operations, there's other things you can do. I showed you the preemptive method, right, of being able to say, first of all, block a download based on a new 0 exploit, right? Or evaluate these binaries to make sure I'm not introducing something potential. But I also have other tools too. So let me show you another thing, right? So let's go ahead and let me share another piece of my screen. Let's go look at something like as a developer. Well, I'm a developer. Here's a simple project that I'm working on. We have our JFrog CLI for IDEs, right? And say something new comes in like Lodash, right? I love Lodash. But if you look here, I actually had a new CVE pop up this morning. Well, as a developer, I can see that there's all these nefarious pieces. So as a developer, I can address this directly where it matters most. And what we do is, as a company, if you look here, we present you with the CVE data. We actually have contextual analysis to let you know we would actually focus it. I don't have it turned on in my ID right now. I'm going to show you some other places where we have it. But this gives you the ability to go in. If you look here, you can see all the public information on why this is actually an issue. I mentioned our JFrog research team, so we give you actually a better version of the summary. We tell you how to remediate it more quickly, and also the details and the reasons for our research. And we also even tell you, is this a direct one? Or in this case, I'll even show you a different one. You can see where, let me see if I can find something that's even, let's see. There we go. Like this one, yeah. If you see this one, this is actually a dependency of a dependency of a dependency of a dependency. And we've gone through, we help, address this. So say this is a new 0 day, we give you all the information on what you can do to address it. But it's just not there, right? Other places that we have it for you as a developer is very straightforward. You can even know from a 0-day aspect and tracing this down, you can even perform an audit, right? So in other words, say you read an article and you find a 0-day and you're like, oh my God, am I using this? You can actually use our JFrog CLI here and we'll actually tell you, oh yeah, here it is. You know, this is a critical issue. But you know what? If we actually give you a little bit more information on how you can fix it quickly. Once again, remediation. Here's the fixed version. If I go from this version to that version, I should be able to address this. I can also perform other evaluations. Like in this case, I downloaded a jar. Remember I talked about embedded components. Maybe I want to use it. Now this is a jar I built, right? So it is terrible. Don't get me wrong. But here you go, right? This is a way for I can go in and I can actually even scan a jar file to look at it and say, what is this actually, what's actually happening here? And I can also go to the next level on this too by even doing things like this where, say you're using, I use Docker a lot, right? Well, a lot of people do. But if you look here, you can actually see we even have a plugin for the Docker desktop that will actually also expose other pertinent information. Even things like 0-day, where you can even go ahead and take a look and even search through to make sure, hey, you know what? Am I really being affected by this? I should probably go take a look. Well, let's go to one of the places, in my opinion, where it absolutely, absolutely positively matters most, right? And that happens to be here. And let's go look at a build, right? Because how do I get information on remediation, and how do I go ahead and make sure that I have everything covered? So say you find a 0-day, okay, and let's go look at something, right? So first of all, let's go ahead and look at an X-ray scan. Actually, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to show you some contextual analysis. In this case, I am going to show you I'm going to say Docker, I'm going to say prod, and I'm going to say local. All right. So here's my Docker prod local. Now this is my production server. Now, say I want to look and actually see, am I being affected by something, right? Am I being affected by a build, or am I being exposed for things? Well, one of the things you want to do is that I'm going to show you this build I have. Now, this build is interesting, right? Look at this. This is a standard build I might have, and there might be a 0-day in here, right? But check this out. I have 265 vulnerabilities. Think about this. I have to go through and validate each one of these. Well, we're trying to help there, right? One of the things I said before was skip something if it's not applicable. If it's not applicable, because I'll tell you, most of the time, it's a single function that's causing the problem. Number one, you're not either using the function, or the function in question came in as like a 4th level transitive dependency, and it may not be applicable to the way that the actual issue is happening. So what we've done is, from a 0-day aspect, is you can look up a CVE if you wanted to, right, and go directly to it. You can look up a component, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the thing is that we actually will go through and tell you, yeah, you know what? In this usage, because this is where it matters, right? Individually, the component is harmless. When it's used, that's when the component becomes volatile, right? This is where you want to go ahead and look at it. So in this case, this is something I produced. And this lets me know that some of these CVEs are undetermined. But look here. Here's a bunch of CVEs that are not applicable. This is a pretty big list of things. If I click on here, you can see where we're like, hey, by the way, you know what? Yeah, this is a critical CVE, but you know what? You're not using it because the function in question, if you look here, is not being called. We're cutting down. You know what? Because like I said, even if say this critical CVE came out as a 0-day, you can go in and search it and say, oh, hey, you know what? By the way, we're actually okay. We're actually not being affected by this. Think about that. You don't have to go query your developers. You don't have to trace down people. You can actually go ahead and say, don't worry, we're good. Within seconds, you can take your CSO, your CIO, your head of security and all that. You can give them a little bit of a breathing space. Your developers can go, all right, I don't have to worry about this. We're not using it. We'll just keep in mind that we're using it. And if I start using it, it'll actually notify me. Let me know, hey, you know what? This is applicable. Let me know you're using it now. You've now introduced this. Because there's other times where you're like, okay, well, here's a CVE, right? Now this one is actually only, I believe, a medium. But if you look here, we're letting you know it's applicable in seconds. Think about this. Remember I mentioned 26 days and 58 days, right? These are times where it takes people to go ahead and search through things to ensure that that they're not exposed everywhere. Well, in this case, I can click on here and say, oh, you know what? Actually, if I go right here, this will actually let me know that I am using this. I can go and laser focusedly address this more rapidly. I just cut down the amount of time it takes you to address these new and critical issues. And we break these down for you. So this way you can go ahead. No, yeah, you're still going to have undetermined. And in this case, at least we can point you in the right direction on where you need to go ahead and address this. Our research team has even gone above and beyond in most cases by delineating down the information that's publicly available and providing more laser sourced information. Other things that we're doing too is that, well, I'm going to show you quickly is let's go look at the actual build that produced this. Because one of the other issues that we see with a lot of companies is the fact that, like say you have a Docker image, right? And you want to know if you're being affected by something, right? We can notify you. Like this Docker container that I built here is critical, but you know what? If you guys have worked with Docker enough, you know this is a standard Docker registry, right? When you're down, you have to do a Docker pull, a Docker run. You got to SHN. See, you know what I mean? It doesn't really tell you much. It's a black box. We give best practices for developers to say, oh, hey, by the way, just so you know, here's the front end and the back end you might be hosting in here. And these might have problems also, right? Understanding what you're running in your environments, or, how was this actually constructed, right? There's a bunch of information here on how this was constructed. You can actually see in our standard X-ray data that we have here, we've got a lot of security, we've got a lot of vulnerabilities. We're even doing deep level scanning. Like I said, maybe there's things in here like, let me see, I'll just do a search. I'm using Spring Boot, by the way, in this container. Spring Boot it has tons of issues. But the thing is that identifying them, understanding, like what is the issue? Our research team is actually adding in more information on how you can even easily, find it way easier, or don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just go ahead and fix it yourself, because we provide that level of remediation and the integrity of data that allows you to go in and address these more rapidly. Even something like this, which is a jar in a jar of a layer of an image of a build. Think about the time it would take you to go do that. But the thing is too is understanding things like operational risk. How old are these components? Have they been end of life? Right. This is what's the cadence of when they release a product. These are all things that you're doing. Right. This is information that makes it easier for you to address them. And even be able to produce reports. Say you want to make sure you inform your CIO, CSO, right? We produce information on violation, licensing, infrastructure as code, and whatnot. We even give you the ability to, like I said, to create SBOMs, right? So if somebody wants to know, you can even export it as SPDX or Cycle and EX formats. But the other big thing here is that, say I'm looking at something like this, I can go from my Docker image maybe to something like this, that here's a tar GZ that I'm hosting, right? And here's the packages that make it up. And here I have my own, what dependencies I have. Once again, the zero-day exploits, right, that might affect me. But being able to resolve things more rapidly by going from the Docker image to the application, well, here's the build that actually produced the application running in the Docker image. And quickly, here's everything that's been affected. What if the 0-day was affected in this user interface, right? This is a UI. If you can see, it says Frog UI. In this case, well, so my CSO asked me, hey, you know what? This is a major problem. We're getting complaints from our customers. We've actually done a check. We're being exploited, blah, blah, blah. How long has this affected us? Well, here you go. It's been affected by this amount. And you know what? Actually, let's go take a look at the build itself. And maybe that component is inside, right? Because here's the build I created, but we're also capturing all the information on usage. And I can go ahead and view individual components that are out there, and also to say, here's every build that's ever used it, right? This is the blast radius, your ability to go ahead and track and trace and rapidly address these issues with data, with information, with the tool sets, pre-evaluation, post-evaluation. giving you the ability to go through and understand how everything is interconnected together. So this way you can be more rapid in your response for remediation, root cause analysis. I had a guy last year who said to me, like, our root cause analysis before you taught us best practices used to take us days and weeks. Now think about that. Potential revenue loss, potential further exploits, days and weeks, right? And then a lot of the reaction, most of the time, is just to throw everything out, right? Think about that. You're going to throw everything out. You're like, okay, we need to address this as fast as we can. And sometimes that's not the best response. What if you had the information, the ability to block, the ability to track and trace and do this more rapidly, more succinctly? This is what it had. He says, you knocked it down to minutes and hours. Think about that. The faster you respond, the faster you can address it. The thing is that understanding it is much more important than actually what's the issue, right? Issues are issues. Those things can be addressed, but understanding the broad reach of something is really where a lot of organizations fail. And understanding that information is also very important, and being able to convey that information more rapidly. So these are just some of the things that I wanted to show you today, that there is hope, right? The thing is that 0 days scares the living hell out of most people, pardon my language, but it does, right? Because it means all hands on deck. And that means that everybody starts to reach out and starts to like look at people and start talking to teams. And there's a lot of manual stuff involved. By using a platform like ours and the tool sets and everything from shift left to protect you before it begins, all the way down to your release management, through your entire SDLC process, when an issue happens, being able to have all the information for you to make sure you have all the information that you need to address those issues, that's where it all comes into play, right? That helps you remediate faster. It gives you a little bit more sense of security. So yeah, you don't have zero hope if you have the proper level of information. It's like having the most exquisite map at your disposal to make sure that you know the path that your company is on. It allows you to, remediate less and innovate more. So I think this is a good time for me now, because I'm looking at the time, to take some questions if there are any. I'm actually trying to find my window. There we go. Does anybody have any questions around this? I hope this has been comprehensive and understanding. Like I said, more information means better root cause analysis, better remediation times, and means that it means also too, you don't have to worry. You can help protect yourself against lost revenue, lost reputation, and others.
All right, great. Thank you so much for the great presentation. And I guess we wait for the questions to roll in. I encourage anyone to ask away. Any questions, no matter how big or small, ask the man himself.
I'm here.
But one question that I have is, what does the contextual analysis feature do for developers and security teams?
Absolutely. So like I said before, so one of the nice things about this is that when we are looking at, say, something like contextual analysis, right? If we go back into the product, because that's probably the easiest way to show this, is that when we're looking at this, it allows pinpoint accuracy on addressing issues, right? So if I say, in this case, right now, we're just doing Docker images as part of this, and actually it might help if I could type today. Let's do that again. Let's go ahead and look at my production, right? In this case, I'm going to select, this, and let's go ahead and look at the vulnerabilities, and let me go find one that's actually applicable. Let's go ahead and sort, right? I can actually sort through these. You can see a whole bunch that are not applicable, but let's go to the ones that are applicable, like this one right here, right? And if you take a look, I know exactly where to start. Just like that. I don't have to go into the code. I don't have to go searching through my Git repo. I don't have to, this actually gives me a starting point within seconds. If you think about that, right? Now this right here, if you take a look, right, this is manager.html. This is actually containing the file store component, and you can see where, that the persistency is enabled, right? I just gave you 3 pieces of data as a developer where you can start right there. So this way I can actually cut down on the amount of time that it takes me to investigate. I have a starting point. And that's where contextual analysis really is phenomenal. if I had it enabled inside, and just to let you know, it's basically the equivalent of static code analysis, which is coming for our product and very soon. This is like next. It's coming up. I'm not going to say when because I'll get yelled at. But the idea here is these are the first levels of that, being able to say, hey, by the way, you're using this, and the nefarious component that you're using is actually being implemented, or it's not being implemented. That's even more powerful. Think about that. Out of that 265 vulnerabilities I had in that container, 145 of them were not applicable. Now think about how much time it would take to investigate 145 components to find out that they weren't being used.
Yeah. Well,
now,
we just had a
really quick, by the way, in the 0 day,
the
0 day comes in, right? Same idea, right? I can go in and it tells me, oh yeah, it's a 0 day, it's critical, but you're not using it. So
very cool. And we just had a new question coming. Thank you, Peter. He's asking, are you able to track different versions of a product? For example, if he has 5 versions of the product in production and a critical vulnerability is discovered in a version prior to the latest, or just in it, would you be able to identify that and inform about the vulnerable versions?
Absolutely. So the thing is that we can actually go all the way down to the runtime. Just so you're aware. Okay. So let's go take a look at a library right here. Right. If you look, I've got multiple versions of the library right here. Right. You can see where they're actually stored. You can see how there are. I can actually go ahead and click in here and then click on build and show you, yeah, here's all the builds that this specific version of that, that component is right here. Just very rapidly. You see how fast it didn't take me long at all. I just did, I just quickly went in and it shows me everything. It shows me where it's stored in a repository. It shows me if, there's any sort of, X-ray data that's behind it. In this case, I've just got licensing. And then on top of that, if you're using our distribution side, we can actually tell you if it was part of a release that went out somewhere. And also, too, as a company, we will be actually also introducing runtime analysis this year. So say also, hey, by the way, in your Kubernetes cluster, in this pod, in this image, it's running right now. I hope that helps. All right. I think that's what they're asking.
Yeah. And you might have mentioned this before, but are your security solutions available on-premise and on the cloud?
They are. We're actually, so what's great is you can actually go to JFrog and you can either do it as a managed solution, it's SaaS, right? I like to say managed because it's a lot more a la carte. You can pick which provider you want, GCP, Azure, AWS, we'll have others. And then what region you want it, right? Or you can do it on premise. You can either install it as Kubernetes, as a straight install. We are very, very flexible in our approach because of just the sheer volume of customers we have. We can't lock ourselves into one thing. We also help companies do this in hybrid environments a lot. We are also air gapped. You can have the ability to use this for air gapping. And we are also going to have a thing called curation coming very soon too. I'm not going to spoil the fun for for people on our marketing team, but it's going to be very exciting.
All right. And do you have any customers using some of the advanced security features, and for what cases are they best used for?
Absolutely. Actually, it's been a real hot topic since we introduced the advanced components as part of this. We have a lot, like I said, we have over 8,000, almost 8,000 customers, almost 100%, like the Fortune 100, top 10 banks, auto manufacturers. We're everywhere. Like I said, we're the biggest little company out there. And we have a lot of companies that saw this and they were like, oh my God, wait, you can actually help us reduce. Security teams love this. You can help it reduce our times by providing us with direct information. Like I always say, I'm like, what it does is it provides laser focused ability to focus on those components, right? So that you know exactly where to start. It's giving you the starting, you have a giant map like this, where do you start? We tell you. And then we help you define the path, so we can help you remediate. But we do. I can't go into customer names. We actually protect our customers from that. We don't talk about it much, but we have a lot.
All right, very cool. And do you have any free security tools for developers, like IDEs or CLIs?
So you still need to attach to our product, but we also have things like FrogBot. FrogBot is like Dependabot for GitHub. That's another thing that we offer. So in other words, when somebody's doing a pull request or something, they can actually go ahead and do a validation before the release, or before they check out. We're also going to have GitHub code scanning, so remote repository scanning. That'll be a thing. But you need to use our JFrog security tools with our JFrog products. Right, it leverages our power. Right, we've invested a lot of money into building these resources.
Right. Okay. All
Excellent.
Super exciting. That's all the questions that we have today. Thank you again for the great presentation, and thanks to everyone who attended today.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys so much for having me here. I really appreciate being here as always. I hope everybody enjoyed this, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers. And the recording of today's presentation will be available in 24 hours. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.